How maritime trade shaped the world.
The more I researched, India started appearing as the main driver of ancient history. The Hittites, the Mitannis, and the Greeks and the Trojans came from India as refugees.
What his book suggests, what evidence suggests, Indus-Saraswati civilization was exporting huge numbers of goods to the then Iraq 5,000 years ago, and in return Mesopotamian Iraqian states were exporting wool to Indus-Saraswati civilization, but that was obviously not enough, so they were also paying in gold. You also cover Lothal. That it was one of the biggest ports of the ancient time.
This is one of the ports, an important port, I think, where the stuff was exported to Sumeria. And it could host 60 ships carrying 30 tons or 30 ships carrying 60 tons at any one time.
You also speak in your books of there's an evidence of some cultural nuances from India to Sumeria, which is ancient Iraq. Things like the seven sages, etc.
The seven sages is a Mesopotamian myth.
Hi guys, welcome to the Immortal India podcast. I'm delighted to have Nick Collins here on the podcast with me. I discovered him on a Twitter thread which had gone viral, and I found the concept that he had and the research that backed it. I found it fascinating. I contacted him, did some research on him, found his background equally fascinating as well. I'm sure you guys will love this podcast. So we're going to jump right in. But before I bring Nick on, I'm just going to do the honors and read a brief introduction of Nick. Nick Collins studied history at Magdalene College, Cambridge, and then embarked on a career in maritime trade with Clarkson's, the world's leading provider of maritime services, where he was interned first in London. And then he worked as the Tokyo representative. He was in the board of directors, executive committee, CEO in Singapore in the 90s, and COO in Dubai. He's lived all over the world. On retirement, he fused his history and maritime experience to write a history of maritime trade. The first two are how maritime trade and the Indian subcontinent shaped the world, and the third, the ascent of maritime trade from 1700 to 2025, will be published in April next year. Nick, thank you so much for joining the Immortal India podcast.
Thank you. It's a great honor.
Firstly, I found your profile fascinating. I mean, if one looks back and connects the dots, the fact that you were interested in in history, you studied history formally, and then you worked in the maritime space, helped you fuse these two bodies of knowledge together. To put together books that are kind of rare, how maritime trade shaped the world.
Yeah, I think I don't want to claim too much, but maybe they're unique. I found that when I retired, that I wanted to do something, a project, and I found that there was no books on maritime trade as the whole concept. Yes, you could find books that specialized on, I don't know, 14th century Baltic trade or something like that, but nothing to put the whole story together. So I decided to do it, and I'm almost done now.
You explore this fascinating idea that the trade from the Indus-Saraswati region may have indirectly led to the creation of pharaonic Egypt, which is really fascinating, kind of counterintuitive. How did you come to this realization, to this concept?
Okay. Well, it's important to say first that I just wanted to write a history of maritime trade. I hadn't got any agenda. But the more I researched, the more India started appearing as the main driver of ancient history, and the influencer of so much, not only of what we're going to talk about, but of Greek philosophy. Really, I think comes via the Phoenicians from Indian philosophy, or some of it. So, in this particular case, we should go back to the story of pharaonic Egypt, and that has been controversial over the past 120 or 130 years or so. First of all, the kind of father of archaeology, Flinders Petrie, started excavating in Egypt at Nakada in the 1890s and discovered two sets of people buried there. One, what he thought were the Egyptians who'd lost a battle with invaders who were buried quite separately in brick pits, together with pots and artifacts which suggested that they were from Sumeria, specifically Uruk, a big city-state at that time, with colonies further up in Mesopotamia. And he found some petroglyphs on the wadis, so the invasion was from the Red Sea. And he called this the dynastic race theory, and that the pharaohs originated from this takeover. And then 1945 comes along, and the thing after the Holocaust, 5 million minimum Jews were slaughtered. The idea of a theory based on race became pretty unfashionable, obviously. But I don't think it devalued the original theory just because of the name. But it became unfashionable. Specialists in Egyptologists, and specialists in Mesopotamia started making their specialization their only focus. So they didn't want to compare and contrast. And also there was a political fashion for putting newly independent countries and their history to the fore. Yeah. And then this was challenged again, I think, from the 1980s. There's two in particular people I think should, Peter James and Jared Diamond, should get a lot of credit for kind of saying this may be politically correct, but it's not correct politically, if you like. And so there's been a gradual, not universal, but gradual move back to the idea that Petrie was right all along, and that that Egypt was invaded and started the pharaohs. And so, from my point of view, studying the economies of this region, I thought, why? What was the reason? Egypt has been invaded many times by the Hyksos, by the Greeks, by the Assyrians, Babylonians, then Persians, and then the Romans, Ottomans, French, and British. So, and mainly, I think most of those were for strategic reasons. But in this case, it has been suggested that it was for gold. And that, to me, makes sense. Why? Looking at the economy of Sumeria, they didn't have a great deal. Apparently they had big sheep farms.
Sumeria is the region of modern Iraq, and there were city-states out there in that ancient times, and that is the part that there were cities like Uruk, etc., that Nick is speaking about. Sorry, Nick, carry on.
No problem. Apparently they had huge sheep farms, and from which they made all kinds of stuff, but obviously woolen textiles, which they exported and traded. So, and there is archaeological evidence of traders in northern Mesopotamia, northern Iraq, if you like, into Anatolia, southern Turkey.
Yeah.
And their correspondence has been uncovered between Uruk and these merchant colonies, and they tell of hardship actually. But the what they seem to tell is that these guys were trading their woolen textiles for Anatolian metals. Anatolia is quite rich in tin and lead and maybe gold was being brought there either from original mines or from Egypt. Don't know, but but anyway, so that seems to be the trade. So how are they paying for all the Indian exports that Sumeria was importing? And we know about this. We know about it's in the Vedic texts, and archaeology has revealed staging points along the Persian Gulf to across to India. David Frawley, I think, has written extensively about the maritime references of and trade in particular. And Indus Valley jars have been discovered as far north as Kuwait, um, and Mark Kinoya has done a great job of explaining how Indian merchant communities and artisan communities were resident in southern Mesopotamia. So we know this. So what were they importing? They were importing food because they needed it. Sumeria is, it's just along the rivers, and either side is desert. So they needed food. Rice is usually archaeologically invisible, but one grain has been found in Tiryns in Mycenaean um, Greece. So I think we can infer that there was a trade in rice, probably ghee, timber, because Sumeria is timber deficient. Um, Not to mention, probably all the goodies like pearls and gems that come from India. So, um, what were they paying back? And just sheep and woolen textiles doesn't seem to be enough to pay for what are life-sustaining commodities coming from the Indus-Sarasvati. It must be metals, surely. But is that enough? Was that enough? And this is a time just after the complete desertification of the Sahara and probably Mesopotamia as well. So, was it gold? What was the suggestions of archaeologists and historians the origin of it? And what we see is that the Phoenicians who coordinated the attack on Egypt, I think there's apart from archaeology and history and so forth, we know that they kind of surrounded not only from Byblos and Tyre, but the four sons of Ham, supposedly in a nice personalized story, biblical story, went to Buto, Libya, Egypt, and Punt, which is supposedly down on the Red
What
Sea
period
coast.
was this, Nick, when this happened?
Conventional history has this at 3000 BC.
3000 BCE. Wow, 5000 years ago. So you're
Well,
saying,
that's conventional history. I'm not sure I agree with it, but anyway,
right,
let's.
okay. So you're saying, guys, just to summarize, what Nick is essentially saying was that the Indus Saraswati civilization, what his book suggests, what evidence suggests, Indus Saraswati civilization was exporting huge numbers of goods to the then Iraq 5000 years ago. Rice, timber, pearl, precious stone, etc., etc. And in return, the then Mesopotamian Iraqian states were exporting wool to Indus Valley, Indus Saraswati civilization, but that was obviously not enough. So they were also paying in gold. This is quite similar to the other issue that we spoke of the Roman trade 2000 years ago between India and the Roman Empire, where Rome was paying in gold. So what Nick's research suggests that even at that time, Many of these states paid the Indus-Saraswati civilization in gold. And because there were huge hordes of gold reserves in Egypt, hence an invasion of Egypt was done to capture that gold reserves.
Perfect. Yes, and no doubt there was some reconnoitering done at first. In Egypt at that time had not a very central political establishment. We don't know much about it,
Mm.
um, uh, but it had the Nile Valley and it had gold,
Yeah.
and so these are all very good reasons to invade.
Mm.
Uh, and the Phoenicians, uh, and at that time, gold was not as valuable as it was in Sumeria, and of course in India, which has always been a great importer and
Gold.
gold.
Indians have always loved gold.
Yes.
Particularly Indian women.
Okay.
You also speak in your books of there's an evidence of not just influence but a transplant of some cultural nuances from India to Egypt and to excuse me to Sumeria, which is ancient Iraq. Uh,
Mm.
Things like the Seven Sages, etc. You want to expand a bit on that?
Yeah, I mean, the Seven Sages is a Mesopotamian myth.
Hmm.
And the origin seems to be that the ruling class of Sumeria came at about the time of the Great Flood, 5600 BC or
Hmm.
thereabouts,
Hmm.
the biblical flood,
Hmm.
uh, where um, refugees from further east,
Hmm.
and it suggested Austronesians from Sunderland, which sunk and disappeared,
Hmm.
now islands of Indonesia,
Hmm.
and they came there, and the evidence is that the that statues are tattoos and so forth, and they defined themselves as survivors of the flood, the first kings there, and the seven sages, one of which is, I think, one or all of them are had the head and body of men and a tail of a fish,
Hmm.
which um, people more educated in this specialization than me have assumed that they came from the sea, in other words, in ships,
Hmm.
and that they were good navigators. And this seems to be transported at this time to Egypt.
Hmm.
I think it's the temple in Edfu from the time of the Ptolemies that
Hmm.
tell the creation myth.
Hmm.
The same mound of creation
Yeah.
uh, called Nunki
Hmm.
in Mesopotamia and Nun
No, no.
in
Interesting.
Egypt.
Just to
And the
just one sec, Nick. Just to clarify to you guys, the Ptolemies were the Greek origin rulers of Egypt around 2,500 years ago. Nick, am I right?
It's
Time
after
of
Alexander the
Alexander,
Great. So
after Alexander.
Alexander the Great
Yeah, so
founded it at
2,200 years.
320 BC or
Yeah,
something.
so 2,300 years ago. But they were Greek origin, but they ruled as Egyptian pharaohs. So they honored the Egyptian ways. Sorry, Nick. Yeah, carry on.
Not at all. So where was I again?
Yeah, sorry. So you said the Ptolemies showed some of the creation myths,
The Edfu. Edfu,
and
yeah.
on which was kind of similar to the
Yes,
Mesopotamian ones, which yeah,
that's right. And they called it Shebtiu or something,
right.
the seven sages. And the first one is called Wa, which is the distant one, which is similar to the Sumerians.
Mm,
And he becomes identified as Horus, apparently. And the third one is Ne,
mm,
seafaring,
mm,
from that's from the Sanskrit, from which we get navigator.
mm,
So it seems that this is more than trading influence. It seems to me that, and it seems to a lot of other people now, that there was an invasion, a transplant. Of course, it never comes uh, exactly the same. The Ptolemies, the Greeks, um, you know, also adopted a lot of Egyptian customs while bringing some of their own culture to Egypt. So, but this seems to me more than just vague trade influences. This seems a transplant.
Hmm. Fascinating. So this is in many ways, a very different take from the traditional narrative, as you said, on how
Mm.
Egypt was founded. Why do you think those traditional narratives have still stuck on for so long? There are many others who have had a different point of view. David Frawley, you mentioned. Graham Hancock is one of the persons whose books I've read. Why do you think the traditional
Mm.
narrative still holds strong?
Well, some of the traditional narratives are right, but
Hmm.
history is what a subject that's 200 years old. I mean, and discoveries are made all the time, and new areas of research are made, and modifications have to be made. In
Hmm.
some cases, modifications are accepted,
Hmm.
but other, I mean, some historians that have been teaching a story for a whole career.
Hmm.
Some of them are too stubborn. They don't want to. They don't want to change their mind.
Hmm.
I saw one podcast that you had on the Indus Valley script,
Hmm.
and you said that oh, I wrote about this. I was wrong. I've got to change my mind. That's great, but not all people do that. So I found a wonderful guy, a quote of a guy, Nicholas Cazanas,
Hmm.
who taught the Aryan invasion theory,
Hmm.
and he said that, and I was challenged on it, so I researched it, and I found out it was wrong. It was wrong. So he was somebody that was willing to change his mind. But
Hmm.
errors that occur, and sometimes they persist for longer than they should. But from a point of view of maritime trade, if you look at the world through that prism, as I have been doing for the whole of my career, you come up with a little bit of a different way of looking at things. But why is that? Um, yeah, I mean, because we're still learning, and the some of the conventional narrative is correct and some not.
Uh, Two questions that occur to me again in the modern day, how people look at things. That in pre-modern times, the perspective of trade. There's this. The Silk Road is seen as that
Mm,
the trade route, right?
mm,
And one of the things that always struck me is how much trade can you do on camels and oxen, right? Real trade
exactly.
happens on ships. And that's the point you're making of maritime trade. So
Well,
one is the depth of
it's
maritime.
also a lot cheaper.
Yeah,
You can move more volume, but it's also cheaper to move it by
to
sea.
do it on maritime trade. So that's a point that you build on maritime trade. So one, on the importance of maritime trade. Secondly, why do you think India was at the heart of this in ancient times? Heart of the maritime trade networks. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think you've got to go and see the importance of Northwest India at this time.
Hmm.
Um, we go back to the Ice Age. We know that sea levels rose
Hmm.
in some gradually, and then three major floods. The last one being the biblical flood of about 5,600 BC.
Hmm.
But at the same time, the Himalaya glaciers were melting,
Hmm.
and they carved out uh, this huge river system,
Hmm.
which we call the Indus Saravasti, but there were seven rivers, right?
Yeah.
Um, in Saptu Sindhu, is it?
Yeah.
In
Sapta Sindhu. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
um, and it was hugely fertile,
Hmm.
um, and by some estimates, supported perhaps 10% of the world's population at the
Hmm.
time.
Hmm.
Um, and 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 of course, there was huge agricultural surpluses, and a happy land, a divine land, the land of Ila, I think, or Il.
Yeah.
Uh,
Ilavarta. Yeah. That was, my
yeah,
God, you know your
okay.
stuff. Yeah. Ilavarta.
Well, I try.
That was one of the names,
So
Ilavarta. Yeah.
right, okay, and down in the ports, they were making. We know that they were making bangles and beads of in carnelian and agate and gold, and chessmen and all this kind of stuff. So this was an economically hugely important economically area probably in the world, and they were exporting to Sumeria in particular, and so that's why it was the most important economic area in the world at that time.
It was an economic engine, and that's your theory that the economic engine was so strong, like the American economy or the Chinese economy now, it actually
Pretty
ends up
much.
impacting geopolitics. So, geopolitics between Sumeria and Egypt was impacted by the Indian trade
Yes, but
system and the Indian
I
economic engine.
I think it's I made this thread to popularize a few ideas, but actually in the book it becomes wider than that. India's importance is wider. For example, we all in Europe we all speak Indo-European languages.
Hmm.
How did that happen?
Hmm.
And just for the same reason the Saravasti dried up, which we think is caused by one or a series of earthquakes.
Hmm.
Um, this is a very earthquake-prone region,
Hmm.
and so I think after the Ice Age, the people living and badly affected by this earthquake, any earthquakes, just like after the Saravasti dried up, migrated, and they migrated to what were cold and inhospitable lands to drier, much more hospitable, warming lands, which were empty.
Hmm.
Um, and so that so we've got the Germanic Indo-European language, where I think in Old Prussian or Lithuanian or both, the word for horse is ashva, the
Ashwa.
same as same
In
as
Sanskrit, there's also
Sanskrit.
Ashwa. Yeah.
Exactly, and there are lots of that's the most obvious one, but there are lots of examples. And then we've got the second one comes out from Anatolia
Hmm.
across the Mediterranean, and that's the Italo-Celtic group of languages, where the Romance languages is where from when they landed in Italy and France and Spain, and then the Celtic languages uh, up the coast of the Atlantic. And then the fourth is after the Saravasti. Uh, of course, it was migrations to the Ganges Valley, but also, I think Conrad Elster has pointed out the the Hittites, the Mitanni,
Hmm.
uh, and the Greeks and the Trojans
Hmm.
were came from India as
Hmm.
refugees and a conquering class
Hmm.
because their warfare, their methods of warfare were superior, in particular the chariot.
Yeah.
So, and I think it's now, I read a fascinating article from about 15 years ago,
Hmm.
where one of the Indian universities had discovered that ironworking was much older than thought, and they'd found it in Uttar Pradesh or Madhya Pradesh, I think, um, dated to before 3000 BC.
Right.
So, and it was always before thought that the Hittites invented ironworking,
Yeah.
but actually they brought it from India.
Hmm.
I mean, I can't prove that, but that sounds logical, doesn't it?
Yeah, fascinating. There's you also cover Lothal. Uh, that in term it was one of the biggest ports of the ancient times, and if you're going to have maritime trade, you need good ports capable of loading and unloading large consignments from ships. Can you take us through what Lothal was like? Lothal is one of the great cities of the Indus Saraswati civilization.
Yes, I think it is, but it wasn't the only one. Somebody that picked up one of my threads recently sent me uh, a whole list of the ports and the archaeology that has been done in them and what it reveals. So I've got to do some work on that and got to read it and research it more. But Lothal was one of the ports that have been fully excavated, and the harbour itself. Interestingly, when I first read about this and the archaeological reports of it, it was thought to be a bathing site and not a port. And it just shows you how people have not, the first thought is not, oh, this must be a port because it's near the coast, but oh, Indian bathing. But anyway,
Blinders.
it's now, I think, accepted widely that it was the port, and it could host 60 ships carrying 30 tons or 30 ships carrying 60 tons at any one time. And the archaeologists have discovered where the merchants did their business and where the ruling classes lived a little bit further out, just like any other port, modern port as well. And so this is where this is one of the ports, an important port, I think, where the stuff was exported to Sumeria. And I think in Kutch itself, there are 50 odd sites. I mean, in other words, it seems that the system was to funnel the goods they wanted to export into the ports via various sites. It seems like an extremely well thought out, efficient system and wealth creating.
And a hub and spoke system, pretty much like what you have in the modern day, actually, with those
Absolutely. And if you read the few correspondence of merchants that we have from ancient times, Sumeria, I think mainly. I don't know if there's any in India. And then we get the Geniza documents from 10th and 11th and 12th century Egypt. And we get medieval Venetian correspondence. And basically, they're all talking the same language, the language that I've been using for the past 40 years. Where do we get the best prices? Should we buy now, or will the price go up, or will the price fall? When should we sell? Oh, there's ships on the way, so don't sell yet. And so they're all talking the same language, exactly the same as any merchant, any trader would today.
Fascinating. There's, one of the things that really jumped out from your work to me was how you postulated that India's central role in ancient history and in maritime trade. That is not how global history has been portrayed. Frankly, that's not how Indian history has been portrayed in India as well. We still need to decolonize our history. What do you think can be done to update this, besides, of course, the work that you're doing?
Well, I mean, I think it's obvious. In fact, the publishers renamed my book, "How Maritime Trade in the Indian Subcontinent Shaped the World." It was at first going to be called "An Untold World History," but they wanted to change it and specifically make it India centric. Yeah, I mean, just hopefully you will see that India geographically sits in the middle of the Indian Ocean. That's why it's so called. And we know that it influenced at a little bit later stage than the one we're talking about now, Southeast Asia, hugely. But yes, until recently, we haven't really looked at how it influenced the West, as I said, in philosophy. And next week's thread is going to be about how Jainism influenced the West.
Give us a brief insight, and we promise we'll release the episode after your thread. We will not eat into your thread. You spoke of how Indian philosophy may have impacted Greek thought as well. If you can just expand on this in ancient times.
Okay, well, first of all, we have to address the Mediterranean Bronze Age chronology. Now, a number of historians have questioned the conventional chronology, whereby the Trojan War, for example, depending on the historian, dates it either at 1188 BC or 1177 BC.
Mm.
Ludicrously precise, I would say.
Mm.
Actually, modern historians, not all of them, again, it's not universal, say that this is wrong. This is, and Peter James, again, groundbreaking great man, um, pioneered this with his book 1981 called Centuries of Darkness. And basically, in the conventional history, after the Trojan War and the breakdown of pharaonic Egypt in the so-called Third Intermediate Period in Egyptology speak, nothing happened for 300 years. It was a dark age.
Mm.
Pottery wasn't made. Writing ceased. But logically, and then it all popped up again magically about 750 BC.
Yeah.
But logically, this is absurd.
Mm.
Civilizations, shipping doesn't disappear and then suddenly magically reappear as if nothing had happened.
Yeah.
So to explain this, the whole of Bronze Age chronology in the Mediterranean and Mesopotamia has to be rethought. So, so I think the Trojan War happened around 900 BC. Interestingly enough, before archaeology came to the fore, Isaac Newton, who is known for all this scientific stuff, was also, as a polymath, researching all this. He thought the Trojan War was about 900 as well, but 900 BC. So if we get there, one of the things that is really important is told in the Bible of a treaty between Solomon of Jerusalem and Hiram of Tyre, Phoenician.
Yeah.
And to solve the breakdown,
sorry, if I may just clarify, guys, Phoenicia is on the Mediterranean coast of the Fertile Crescent. It would be somewhere where Israel, Lebanon, all that area is in today's day. Nick, am I correct?
yeah.
But that would be maybe 3,000 years ago. Yeah, 2,000, 3,000 years ago.
Yeah,
Yeah?
in my view, the invasion
I
of
just gave
Egypt
the
was
conventional understanding so that my readers can follow, my viewers.
yeah.
But sorry, go
And
ahead.
in my view, and I think there's plenty of people that agree with me, the invasion of Egypt was coordinated with the Phoenicians.
Okay.
Okay.
Which has nothing to do with modern politics.
No,
You can
not
confuse
really.
modern
No,
politics. I'm joking. I'm joking.
no. So again, where was I?
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I broke
No, not at all.
your chain of thought. You were talking about how Phoenicia and how the trade routes around the Battle of Troy, which was said to be at 900 BCE.
Yeah. Okay. So Hiram and Solomon, they had this treaty. The Phoenicians were trading with Egypt via Egyptian ports, but when Egypt collapsed politically, he did a deal with Solomon to use the southern port in the Gulf of Aqaba called Ezion Geber to do this. And the Bible is quite explicit and open about it. They traded with East Africa and with India, what they called Ophir, which seems to be the equivalent of the Erythraean Sea, which the Romans called the Red Sea, Persian Gulf, and Western Indian Ocean. And they brought back ivory and gold and all kinds of goodies, animal skins and peacock feathers, and they used Tamil words as well in the Bible for these. And
Really?
Jerusalem.
Sorry to cut in. What are those Tamil words? Would you know?
Oh, I don't know. I can't remember.
You
It's
should
in
put
the
that in your
book,
thread.
but I
Tell
can't.
me. Yeah. Okay.
I can't remember.
Fascinating.
Sorry.
So that's clear proof that it was India trade. But sorry, carry on.
What happened, therefore, is that because of the Indian monsoon, you can't trade. You've got to wait between May and September to sail back. And so my contention is that these Phoenicians and the primitive Hebrew pastoralist, I say primitive, I don't want to offend anybody, but they were pastoralists. They weren't worldly, port-dwelling, knowledgeable people, but they all went, as in the Hebrews' case, as crew, and had to stay in India, where they must have absorbed Indian ideas. The very fact that they started to write down their history, their law codes, and so forth in the Bible, in other words, what we call the Talmud or the Bible, I think the logical explanation is that they saw what India was. It was the tradition of writing, of the knowledge, and adding to that knowledge, because we know that a lot of the Mahabharata, for instance, was added to over centuries, I think.
Yeah.
So the logical explanation is that they did it too, and they started elevating one God, Yahweh, above all the others, and then he became the leading God, and then eventually the only God. When you read the Bhagavad Gita, if I pronounce that right, I don't know.
Great. Yeah.
This is the conversation between Arjuna and the Supreme Being. That must have influenced them. Indeed, certain phrases, Lord of Lords, and quite a lot of others, are lifted straight out of that book into the Bible. So with that, also coming back to the Jains, the merchants that the Phoenicians were interacting with were mainly Jains. We think it's logical. They were strong in ports. They couldn't Jains because they were vegetarians and didn't want to kill animals, and they therefore weren't into agriculture, but they were financiers and merchants on the west coast. I don't think it's any coincidence that, for instance, in Greece, Agamemnon in the before the Trojan War sacrificed his daughter, and there was lots of examples of sacrificing bulls and lambs. And then somewhere around 600 or so BC, all the sacrifice ends. Yeah. As the Jains influenced Hinduism, I think that those ideas came into the Middle East and into Greece, because and the only example where it is alleged to continue human sacrifice is what the Greeks say about the Phoenicians and Carthaginians. That may be right, but I suspect there's a lot of Greek propaganda in that, because otherwise all this human and animal sacrifice finishes. Yeah. So I think there's multiple areas. Oh, and you ask about the philosophy. About the same time, this philosophy from India was transported via the Phoenicians, in particular Sidon, I think, where the Greeks themselves said there were plenty of philosophers in Sidon, and that's where they get it. And for instance, the idea that you can't step into the same river twice, that everything is constantly moving, is the mirror image. This has been noted by philosophers for many years, and it's always been thought that the Persia must have been the intermediary between them. That yes, the Greeks did borrow, but through Persia. But the problem is that there's no evidence of contact through Persia, but there is evidence of maritime trade via the Phoenicians. So I would say that is the conduit. Again, the failure of others to appreciate the importance of maritime trade in the ancient world, which I am trying to highlight.
Nick, at the heart of of what your case is the importance of maritime trade, which perhaps conventional history has ignored. And maritime trade not just as for the transfer of goods, but also for the transfer of ideas. If there are merchants,
Exactly.
are saying those ideas carry across as well, and obviously. An economy, which is the largest economy of the time, the largest population of the time, will carry its proportionate weight in the ideas that it carries out as well. I find your entire thesis utterly fascinating. Nick, if our viewers wanna check out your books and your handles, can you tell us what your books are? Are they available in India, and your Twitter handles, so that my viewers can find you easily and read your books and read your threads?
Okay, yes, thank you. Well, um, some people have commented that the books are not available in India, and some have said they are available, but they're rather expensive.
Hmm.
I have talked to my publisher about that, and they said that they have some contacts in India in the publishing houses and are addressing that. But I don't know how long that will take.
No.
But but they should be available on Amazon and direct from the publisher. The publisher is Pen and Sword. The books are called How Maritime Trade and the Indian Subcontinent Shaped the World, Ice Age to Mid 8th Century. The second is called The Millennium Maritime Trade Revolution, 700 to 1700, How Asia Lost Maritime Supremacy. And the third one, as I say, will be out next year. The publishers wanted the end date to be 2025, a quarter of a century. So I've written it, and I have to tweak it at the end of the year to see what effects Trump's tariffs have had and bring some figures up to date. That's so that's why I've got time to start this social media splurge on X,
Wonderful.
on Substack, and
Well,
LinkedIn.
what are your handles on Twitter and Substack?
No, Nick Collins, 1953. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
At the rate Nick Collins 1953. Guys, check it out. If you can find Kindle versions of Nick's books, do check it out. I find the ideas fascinating. Nick, among the things that I've seen is good scholars go where their research and ideas take them, independent of pre-existing biases. I find that attitude in you. And I'm looking forward to your next book and to reading the Kindle versions. And I hope to remain in touch and come back and interview you again.
That'd be great. Thank you, Amish.
Absolute pleasure. Bye, Nick.
Cheerio. Bye bye. Thanks. Thanks a
Bye.
lot for this.